I just remember the time he left, he took all of his clothes, and I just remember I was standing at the front window and just waving goodbye, and I just had tears streaming down my face, and I was so upset.
I remember going up into my sister's room, and my sister and my mother and I being right there and looking out the window and watching my dad drive off and all of his things in the back of his car.
It was hard trying to, be an 11-year-old little kid and trying to cushion, your parent.
I would be a completely different person if my parents had not divorced.
We had a lot of pain. It was real. I hurt a lot when I was young. I cried myself to sleep a lot at night.
A lot of times I thought, what could I have done to make my parents, stay together?
Hello, I'm Steve Grissom. If you have children, it's essential that you watch this video and talk about it before making your decision whether to divorce. You'll gain valuable information about how children are impacted by the process. Thanks for joining us. In the hurt and deep emotions of a marriage crisis, how your children will be affected is often overlooked. You are so focused on your own problems that you don't have the perspective to see how your kids will respond. It's also true that children are sometimes used as a rationale for getting a divorce. You might think they will be better off if you separate or divorce and are not exposed to the difficulties you are facing. Dr. Archibald Hart says that line of thinking is just not true. We often hear parents say, it's better for the kids if we go ahead and get a divorce, that living together is harder on the kids than if we split apart. Is that true?
Very little truth to that statement. I can understand when you have a very abusive father, an extremely emotionally ill mother, that under very extreme circumstances, the divorce, the separation and the divorce may be justified in order to protect children. That to get children out of a really abusive situation, the divorce is perhaps the only way that one can deal with that. But the majority of divorces are not in that category. To use that as an excuse to get a divorce isn't reality. That in fact, divorce is always damaging.
In almost every case, divorce will have a negative effect on your kids.
I remained very angry with him for a very long time. I had a hard time forgiving him. He had a hard time expressing love for me, and he had a hard time dealing with the fact that he knew that I knew and that I didn't want to forgive him.
There's anger, I think there's fear, I think there's fear of abandonment, not only by one, but now as the other, is the custodial parent going to leave me too? I think there's guilt, what part did I play here? I think that adults have a hard time handling all the emotions involved in that, and I think we should realize that children have a tremendous burden that they carry, wondering what they did wrong.
That child is not able to deal with the emotions that you're feeling and going through. They handle it, I handled my emotions as a 10-year-old very differently than, my mother or my father did. So don't place the child in between.
I'm convinced that divorce has a very, very negative effect on children for several reasons. The breakdown of the family structure. Right at the critical time when a child is developing, needs support, needs a strong, warm, loving environment, everything goes to pieces. The separation of the parents, the loss of one of the parents, the tremendous loss of friends and support, because most children who go through divorce end up having to move, go somewhere else. It represents a loss as serious, in my opinion, as the death of someone in the family.
He goes on to say that we teach children many negative lessons through the divorce experience.
Divorce teaches some very, very nasty things. It teaches you how to be hateful, teaches you how to backstab, it teaches you how to be spiteful, it teaches you ways of expressing your temper, your anger.
Kids are brutally honest. I remember one time last year when I was being really critical, almost snipey about the other woman. And I told my son, honey, I don't want you to hate her. That's not what I want, because I don't want hate to be a part of your life. And he looked at me with all the directness of a 12-year-old, and he said, oh, Mom,
Yes, you do. And the reality of that was so strong that it forced me to look at very deeply who I was showing up as to my son.
Children also suffer from the loss of structure that almost always accompanies divorce.
Well, the loss of structure is devastating if there is none. If it's just up for grabs, then everybody's wondering who's in charge here. What's happening here? And that's when children react in different ways. It's going to happen anyway. There's going to be a loss of structure immediately as mom or dad, whoever the custodial parent is trying to put their system together.
I didn't have anybody sit and watch me do homework or help me do homework or really supervise. I was really unsupervised at that time. Even though I was in the neighborhood, my mother really never knew what I was doing or what I was into. And I was into a lot.
And I went from trying to meet the need of a newborn baby to the need of a child just starting school. And it's just a big blur because I don't ever remember doing anything for myself, and I barely remember doing anything for them. It was just keeping my head above water. Just getting macaroni and cheese on the table at 5 o'clock and getting them into bed by 9. But I don't really remember a whole lot of details.
Let's look now at how divorce affects children of varying ages. The youngest children react by trying to get their parents back together.
I was always hoping and praying, if I had, one wish in the whole world, it was to get my parents, back together. I was just praying every night, please, it'd just be perfect.
Before they actually had gotten divorced, I thought, yeah, Dad's going to move back later sometime. But then he didn't, so.
Many times the youngest child does what he can to try to put the marriage back together, asks a lot of questions that are unanswerable, and a lot of times we're seeing in research, even if a divorce takes place for a child who is 3 or 4 at that time, the behavior may not come out until 12 or 13 years old. The anger may not be manifested till the age of freedom, the age when the child can get out and about a little bit, and we've seen some aggressive behavior at that time.
Maybe children from 2 to 5, they tend to regress. They go back to earlier modes of behaving. A child who is potty trained may suddenly go back to not being trained. They want to be fed. They want to behave like little babies. And this can be very aggravating for parents who have to put up with that.
When children reach the ages of 5 through 8, it's often the school teacher who sees the most significant changes.
Basically, I think we're looking at an emotional upset that shows up in the school when they come in the morning. They're distracted, they're upset, they just can't concentrate, and they're having difficulty maybe in the academic area, not understanding, needing to have instructions repeated, that sort of thing.
I think the teacher will see a despondency sometimes in school, a lack of working up to their full academic abilities. I think a teacher will also see maybe some aggressive behavior out on the playground. The children just trying to deal with this pain and don't know how to deal with it.
Acting out, wanting to pick up a chair and throw it would be an example. Just constantly upset, out of their seat when they should be sitting there, just not coping with the structure in the classroom, and getting out of line, deliberately doing things that would get attention because perhaps they're not getting enough attention at home.
If you have preteen children, you can expect their self-esteem to be affected.
My father had taken off and I felt like he didn't love me, and I tried to please him and couldn't. That brought me down to about the size of a dime. I did not like myself at all, and I didn't like a lot of people.
Well, that's the age where they begin to start to try to define who they are, and that's the critical age for self-esteem. That's an age where I wonder how valuable I am, and that's the age where I start to blame a lot, and I look for somebody to blame this divorce on, and many times as I do that, I may even be blaming generally the custodial parent that's in front of me, but in my heart I may be blaming myself. That's the age where I may step into behaviors that are way beyond me. That's the age where I try to act a little bit independent. That's the age where the boy, the preteen boy, thinks he's the man of the house. That's the age where the preteen girl gets a little distant from mom and is maybe even sexually precocious. That's the age where that child battles for independence. Before they're ready for independence, trying to act older than they are, and maybe even in this precocious behavior thinking they will win the custodial parent back. That's the age of dreams. That's the age that they dream, Daddy's coming home one day. How can I do that? How can I make that happen? That's the age when I say, I want to go live with Dad. And almost to spark a reaction from Mom, and almost to see if Dad will take me, and almost dreaming that they'll come back together. I say a lot of things I don't mean then in my quest to define my feelings.
I have a very strong personality. I think part of that is because of what I've had to go through. And to get, even now, I'm still dealing with the self-confidence thing. That I think that there's no way I would have been the same person if I hadn't been through this.
Teenagers often have very strong reactions to the divorce of their parents.
The child of divorce has a higher dropout rate, the teenager of divorce. The teenager of divorce has a higher rate of alcohol and cigarette and drug use. The teenager of divorce has a higher rate of referrals for law violations. The teenager of divorce has a higher rate of sexual involvement at an earlier age with more frequency. All these things, and they're not correlated with when the divorce took place. So it doesn't seem to matter that much whether the divorce took place just last year or when he was 3 years old. Statistics show us that as part of the foundation is pulled away in that child's quest, there's almost an abandonment of rules in many cases. So that is the most difficult time.
They had just a lot of anger, and they would focus it on me, and sometimes both of them together, and that was real difficult for me to handle, besides what I was already dealing with, my own feelings.
Jimmy's the biggest victim in the whole thing. I mean, he has to live with it from both sides. He has to hear from her side, has to hear from my side, and here's a kid that wants to please Dad when he's with Dad, and Mom when he's with Mom, and he's not going to say anything. He's holding all this stuff inside. And I've seen so many times where you can just see it eating him up a lot of times. He just wants to burst.
And sometimes they would attack me for feeling like I was responsible, or that I hadn't been the wife I should have been, and or that I was at fault. And then just other things they would be angry about, not necessarily about the marriage, but just their anger would just come out toward me.
There's also a difference in the way boys and girls react to a divorce.
We're seeing that both of them react harshly, that what we could call, say, a father absent home, a girl will go and date a little earlier and get more sexually active than other girls. In the father absent home, the boy will become perhaps very sullen and rebellious, and there is no male role model, so he he becomes it, and he goes in that quest to kind of take charge, and there is even a little more on the boy part, some abuse of Mom, almost a blaming that she chased Dad out the door, when in his heart of hearts he knows that's not true.
Research is clear that boys who are at around age 12 are the most seriously affected by divorce. And that stands to reason, because earlier than that, you're not really aware of what's going on. Later than that, you have the resources, the ability to cope with what's going on. But at that age 12 is a crossover point, right in the middle there, that you know you are maximally aware of what is going on, but minimally have the resources to deal with it.
There are some nearly universal reactions among children. Almost all kids become depressed because of the divorce of their parents.
Depression, of all the problems I've talked about, depression I think is the most serious. Some research has shown that children as long as 10 years after the divorce are still depressed. And what is at heart here, what is at root in the depression is the loss that they have experienced. Not only the loss of a parent, because some parents are good and they're able to maintain ongoing contact with their children. But it's the loss of a dream, it's the loss of the ideal, it's the loss of the intact home. And we're all designed, God has designed us, that we respond to loss with depression. And it's damaging to children because that, of all the emotional consequences of divorce, is the one that parents least pay attention to.
Another effect of divorce is that your kids must live with the stigma that comes with divorce. Even in today's society, divorced kids are affected by that stigma.
He sees the other children with parents there, two parents usually, and just feels embarrassed, feels that he's different, he's out of sync with the rest of his peers.
The self-esteem of children is affected, I think, first of all, by the stigma of divorce. It amazes me. Even though divorce is as common as it is today, children don't enjoy the experience. They don't want it. They would give anything to avoid it, to keep the family together. It's embarrassing for children, and so your esteem is affected by that. You imagine that you're the only one going through that experience. And even if you have a friend or two whose parents are also divorced, somehow they were different. You're the one who is being damaged by it. And so the esteem is eroded.
That was a time when most of the other children in my classroom, their parents were married. And it was embarrassing. It felt uncomfortable. And, then there were, as you get a little older, there were all the social kinds of things I had to deal with, missing dances to go to my dad's house, or can't go to the slumber party because it's your weekend to be away, and all those kinds of things. So it was hard socially sometimes.
No matter what age your child, it's likely that he or she will be affected at school. One study shows that children from intact families had less absenteeism, enjoyed higher popularity, and achieved higher levels in reading and math scores. This contrasts with children from divorced families who were more likely to be placed in special reading classes, to have lower test scores in reading, math, as well as overall grades in school subjects. It has also been shown that these difficulties in school will trail your kids throughout the remainder of their lives. As with adults, research shows that divorce affects the health of children. One study showed that children living in alternative or single families are 25 to 30% more vulnerable to becoming ill than children who live in a family with two parents. Another study shows that children of divorce live shorter lives than people who grew up in two-parent families. The study showed that men from divorced families lived to an average age of 70, while men who lived in families where the parents remained married lived to an average age of 80. For women, the figures were 82 years and 86 years. If you do split up, another nearly universal reaction is that your kids will maintain a perpetual hope that you and your spouse will get back together, and they'll work very hard to make that happen.
I kind of for a while thought for sure they would at the very beginning, when my dad, before they actually had gotten divorced, I thought, Dad's going to move back later sometime.
Even though my son knows that his father and I will not get back together, it's still in his mind, and he still tries to get us together in his own way.
They have an active feeling and a dream that their parents ought to stay together. And they pray for it. In the scripture where it says God hates divorce, it mentions two things. It says, I witnessed the vows that you made with the wives of your youth. So God's concerned with keeping our word. But it also says, I desire godly offspring in that passage in Malachi chapter 2. And the reason it mentions it is God is quite aware that these children, when they see their parents beginning to separate and then divorce, begin to pray fervently to Him for that not to happen. But God made free will available to people. It goes ahead and it happens. But the child's experience then is that God doesn't answer prayer, that He doesn't care about their heartbeat and what their feeling is. And so they continue to pray. Somehow their parents will get together again. And as soon as they see their parent dating someone new, and the chance is now diminishing for the possibility of their family to live happily ever after, it hurts. And it hurts real bad, and sometimes hurts to the point where it makes them afraid. They don't know what the new situation will represent. They don't know how heavy-handed the new person will be that's coming into it. But there's a natural fear of step-parents that comes from our tradition of fairy tales, that comes from experience of life.
If you do separate or divorce, you will have to make arrangements for your children to visit the non-custodial parent. Often, this visitation is complicated and controversial.
There are no good answers for visitation. It's not God's plan. It's not ideal. The best case scenario is for me to decide, regardless of my ex, I'm going to try to cooperate. Regardless of my ex, I'm going to have to compromise. My ex wants me to drop him off and pick him up and never participate in the transportation, and it's not fair. But I'm not here dealing with the nurturing of my ex anymore. I'm dealing with the nurturing of this child, and I don't want this child to arrive under strain all the time because my ex has to come pick him up and is furious that at my ex's anger towards me, the child loses here. And so I have to decide I'm going to go the extra mile. And, you know, maybe I've gone the extra mile for 8 years now. I'm tired of it, but I'm doing it for your sake, Lord, and for the child's sake.
Oh, I remember one experience that was just, that to this day just kind of brings hurt, and I just remembered it. But a time when my mother was beginning to go out some with the man she eventually married and has been married to for 18 years since then. And we were with my dad, and my dad had called her on the phone, and they wanted us to come back and do something special with them. And my dad said, well, you choose. Do you want to come do something with us, or do you want to go back and do something with your mom, and they're going to go out and play putt-putt and all this kind of thing? And I didn't know how to read him. I thought, does he want me to stay? Does he want me to go? What should I do? And so I said, well, we'll go back. Well, you know, then he put on his sunglasses, and as we were in the car, him driving us back, I could see the tears just coming down his face. And so that was real devastating to just feel that pull, having to make choices. Holidays were always difficult. They still are. It's still hard because you enjoy the person you're with, but you miss the person you're not with, and it's difficult.
Recent research shows that there is an inevitable loss of the bond between the child or children and the non-custodial parent. One researcher noted that by the time the children reached adulthood, the relationship quality with the divorced non-custodial fathers is about the same as that as children who never lived with their father.
It hurt me a lot, and of course I blamed him because he wasn't making an effort to make contact with us. And of course that just harbored and built on the anger I already had for him. I basically felt all through high school like, why should I care? He doesn't care.
Now let's look at an area that will be very difficult for your kids. If you decide to begin dating someone else after your divorce, your children will likely not be very supportive of any new relationships you enter into.
I like to think first from the children's perspective. It scares the children to death. They have an active feeling and a dream that their parents ought to stay together.
Because every time she'd get a boyfriend, I would always just like do stuff to make him just want to not be with us and just not be around us. And he might have been just the nicest guy in the world, and I just would not like him. My mom still says to this day, if I married a preacher, you would have not liked him. And, you know, she was just, I don't know what it was. Maybe I just didn't want to lose her since I already lost my dad.
Your kids will find it very difficult to see you showing affection to another person.
Because they see it a real violation to what was the first marriage covenant. The children think that this is inappropriate behavior. They don't feel comfortable with seeing their parent be affectionate with a stranger or someone on the outside of their family. It isn't natural to them. And if you think like a child, you could see how disturbing all of these things could be if you try to imagine your own parents divorced and then relating to another person and kissing them and holding them and doing things that maybe you may never have seen your own parents do. In a lot of cases, in these dating relationships, the couples get more demonstrative as dating couples than they were as married people. And so the children have never witnessed this before, which is very frightening to them. They don't see it as natural.
If this relationship leads to marriage, you could be faced with even more problems. Children and stepchildren are the leading cause of the breakup of second and third marriages.
But in a second marriage, in 70% of the households in America, there are children in the household. And stepchildren in marriage don't seem to work very well. Despite the myth of the Brady Bunch, the stepchild has the inherent felt need to sabotage the relationship, to be loyal to their blood parent. and they are the leading cause of second marriages coming to divorce, and in great numbers.
I didn't like her at all. Now I kind of get along with her, but it's kind of strange, when I go visit him and she's there. It's like visiting a totally different family that's not related to me.
They see the step-parent as the enemy. If we remember Cinderella, we remember how step-parents are viewed, or Hansel and Gretel. It just is not accepted by children, and they very strongly defend with loyalty the missing parent in the home.
Well, I tried my hardest to not have them get married because I was going to gain a stepsister, and yeah, she was very nice, but for some reason, I just didn't want to get along with either of them because I just felt like they were going to take my mom away from me, and I'm not going to have anybody left because my dad's already gone, and my mom's going to have another man, and I'm just going to be left here, and nobody's going to care about me, nobody's going to love me because my mom's going to have, a husband and everything, and I just felt like, I'd be all alone and everything. It's different because you have to get used to, these other people that you haven't been around all your life, and all of a sudden they come in and, they're married to your mother or to your father, and you have to get used to their habits.
We want to turn our attention now to the long-term effects of divorce on children. Sometimes the impact carries into their adult lives. A big concern is the time bomb effect. Children who seem to be doing well, but who begin to experience deep problems as they get older. Here are some conclusions drawn from recent research on the subject. Most children who experience divorce grow up to see it as a shadow on their childhood and adolescence. Almost half of these children become adults with emotional problems such as worry, underachieving, self-esteem problems, and anger.
There are many, I call them unfinished business, that children who go through divorce have to contend with later in life. How do you trust someone? How do you believe that somebody loves you when the ones who have said they loved you, you feel like they've betrayed you?
Boys demonstrate difficulties in school, relationship with peers, and improper ways of handling aggression. Almost 50% report being unhappy and lonely in their 20s and have difficulty with lasting relationships. Girls face an increase in risk for precocious sexuality, teenage marriage, teenage pregnancy, and divorce later in life. Young women entering adulthood face anxiety and guilt, causing problems in relationships and marriage. One researcher calls this the sleeper effect. Experts agree that there are very few situations where divorce does not harm children significantly. We encourage you to carefully consider this information as you make the decision whether to divorce or stay together. I'm Steve Grissom. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next session.